All right, everyone, welcome back. We are on the OGX podcast. Me and James today. We gave Krista and Ashley the day off. We're going to be talking all things strength and conditioning today, which I'm very excited about. And just having a conversation about some of the insights that James has picked up here over the last couple of months working for us. You started, on April 1st? Is that right?
Yeah, it was early April, yep.
Yeah, it's been a few months now, so we have some questions for him and for him to share his insights. So welcome, James, to the OGX podcast.
Thank you.
First, just tell us a little bit about your background, your professional experience, kind of where you were at before coming to OGX.
Yeah, so I am the director of strength and conditioning at OGX now. Before this, I got my master's in exercise science at Aurora University. All building up to that, I've done internships at the D3 level. I've done internships with Northwestern. I've been in the private sector. And then my first strength coach job was as the head strength coach in Bensenville for their baseball organization at the Bodome. Mm-hmm. And then I got my first director position at my next job at base in LaGrange. And then I was contacted by you guys, and I'm at OGX.
And then we found you and brought you into our softball papoose. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to our prepared questions in a second, but can you just tell me, talk a little bit about what the last couple months has been like for you, kind of transitioning to a softball only role and working only with female athletes. Just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have worked with female athletes, especially a lot at my most recent job. I will say that I like training females more because they listen and they're very intentional in the weight room. Right. I haven't had to break up two athletes like wrestling on the turf as that happens. So that's nice. They take you for what you're trying to give. They're very appreciative of the coaching. But then just as far as like systems go, I've never been in a place like OGX. Like my Bodome job, we started to try to figure out some things, create systems of training ourselves, like annual programs and how everything's incorporated. But then stepping into OGX and the depth that you guys have developed for pitching, hitting, total health of the athlete, and then how strength and conditioning helps support that it makes my job as a coach easier, especially just with the backgrounds that everybody on the staff has.
Awesome. I obviously love that answer of talking about our systems. We've worked really hard over the last couple of years to have those systems, and your role in strength and conditioning and being able to jump right in it's been fantastic.
No, you guys have made it easier on me for sure.
All right, let's get to our prepared questions because we got a number of them. So I feel like I said we had to rein them in because I felt like we could talk for hours here. So one of our first questions here was, tell us about some of the misconceptions that you have either recognized through social media or in talking with, potential families or athletes that will train with us. What are some misconceptions about training rotational athletes for power? Basically, what are we doing well as a softball community? What are we missing as a softball community in even understanding the rotational athlete, let alone training them for power?
Yeah, I just want to start it's not all just med balls and Russian twists. It's when you swing a bat, it starts from the ground up. So the way your feet are interacting with the ground, moving up to your hips, up the kinetic chain, and then finally releasing that into your hands. It's just, there's the sequencing that comes with to make your swing more efficient. And if the power's starting from the very ground, then I, as a strength coach, want to enhance how the athlete interacts with the ground, their lower body strength and coordination, because just being able to move the house doesn't mean, you could do it with some finesse as a swing takes. So it's not just, like I said, not just rotational core exercises to get that. You need a full picture of strength and conditioning.
I pulled our coaches and a couple of my coaching friends for this conversation just to kind of see what did they want to talk about? What did they want to hear about from a strength and conditioning perspective? Kaylia yesterday mentioned rotational med ball throws and some of the things that she sees, on social media and sees other athletes and other training facilities doing. what do you see from a rotational med ball standpoint? That exercise is so popular, as you said, like it's just not med ball throws and Russian twists. What about that exercise do you often see where the execution could be better of it? Not that it's wrong, but that the execution could be better, more intentional.
Just so much, like when a kid's trying to throw a med ball, they just try to put all they got into it. So they get real upper body driven, where when you're in the cage swinging it, your upper body's not leading the way when you swing a bat. Mm-hmm. You want to start from the ground, get into your hips, stay back, and let the ball go. And I think med ball throws are kind of how we use like plyos for pitching.
Yeah. The
weight makes you like it slows the movement down a little bit and gets you into the position so you can kind of feel what that's like. So, and it's more of like I say it connects the dots between strength and conditioning and swinging the bat. So it'll let you express that, it'll let you feel it, so that when you get in, and you raise the speed that you're swinging with a lighter bat, it'll feel more like ingrained. The pattern's more developed that way for you and your nervous system.
Do you often do you think it's an intent issue? Do you think it's something where if you see an athlete that maybe isn't quite executing a movement like that, something that's got to be, for speed and is supposed to be something about expressing all of that power? Is it an intent issue? Is it a setup issue? What do you typically see as like a common?
Yeah, I think even just the weight of the ball plays a big part. So trying to put the bat is not even 2 pounds that we're swinging, but they're putting a 15-pound ball in the hands of the athlete to throw, especially when we're talking about somebody that's maybe 12 years old. This is their first time stepping into this. I don't have any reason to expect that athlete to be able to handle that in sequence the right way to throw it. Yeah. So I would like, honestly, to bring the ball down and work on the intent, like you're saying. The intent is to move the ball fast in a coordinated fashion. I don't think that just putting the heaviest med ball in somebody's hands is going to let them do that. They're going to seek other strategies to get that ball to the wall, like using their upper body, because they don't have it in the lower body to get there yet.
I love that you said the med ball concept is very similar to throwing plyos, whether it's overhand, pitching, whatever. I think you and I, as we've gotten to work together, I think have become very much on the same page of the role of strength and conditioning in supporting hitting and pitching and the player level, so to speak. Mm-hmm. This is a little off topic from our prepared questions, but can you just kind of tell me a little bit of, seeing the way our systems operate, seeing where strength and conditioning kind of fits in? Did that surprise you basically about the role of where strength and conditioning should sit? What advice do you have for strength and conditioning coaches who are maybe in college settings and need to support the team athlete? What kind of insights have you gathered over the last couple of months?
I mean, S&C is okay. The sport is always the most important thing. That's why these kids are here.
You just made a lot of coaches really happy.
but S&C should support their ability to do it. So me chasing a really heavy back squat sounds fun and could be good, look good on my part, right. But you need the quality of the movement, and then when you have that and the patterns developed, then you can load it. So I don't want kids, especially the kids on the lower side developmentally, to just be chasing numbers, because once their body figures it out and they go through puberty, all that's going to come anyways. Yep. So move well, develop these movement patterns so that when the time comes and your body is ready and able to support the growth, that you'll explode.
Yeah, good one. I like that. Our next kind of prepared question here. This one's kind of a doozy. You entered into our time of year really kind of in the middle of the in season, right? Mm-hmm. So being in April, most of our high school athletes were, out on the playing field with our remote athletes. We have a handful that are in states that don't play, until the fall. In season was such a big push for us this year, particularly educating our athletes, educating our parents, our families about why staying in particularly strength and conditioning is so important in season, not just for pitchers, but for all players. So can you kind of talk just very generally of what approach should a strength and conditioning coach take? What concepts should parents or athletes be thinking about when it comes to in season? I have limited time, and how do I get the most bang for my buck out of that to help keep myself healthy?
Yeah, we really don't need a lot of time. Volume is not the issue in season. So they're getting that from their sport. All we need to do on the strength side is make sure that their movement quality remains to the best of our degree. And that's by exploring larger patterns of movement and not doing too much volume or intensity to push them over the edge into soreness. So like everybody thinks, oh, I can't train in season because I can't be sore, blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of what we're training for anyways. Me as a strength coach, my goal isn't to make somebody sore. That's never it. The whole point of doing structured strength conditioning for softball is to be able to go out there and play softball at a high level. So me as a strength coach, I'm not going to put them in a situation to take away from what they can do out on the field.
Good. That the answer of the not being sore, I think that comes up in so many places, right? So we give this message to our athletes of, you want to lift in season. We get sometimes those, answers of, I don't have time. I don't want to be sore. And to your point of structured strength and conditioning, like structured, being really thoughtful of what does their in-season demand look like? How should an in-season program support them? What are some general, I'll call them buckets, some general buckets that an in-season program should address? Meaning whether it's, activation, power, mobility, what would be your, kind of buckets you're trying to kind of tick the boxes for an in-season athlete?
Yeah. So if we look at like our movement quality screening, I feel like there are two big pieces that feed into that. One is mobility, which is just your ability to move into certain ranges of motion, and then the strength you have within those ranges of motion. So our movement quality assessment, like the core test where they're laying on their back and they move their feet side to side for anterior core, that's strength there. That's not totally range of motion, but everything that we do is pieces of that. So we want to maintain the range of motion that one-sided sport athletes tend to lose. So they're always swinging a bat from this side. They're always throwing with that one hand. So you want to try to make sure that as an athlete, they can keep moving everywhere and they're not losing anything, and then maintaining the strength. So it's just hitting the basics. We're doing lower body, anterior, posterior. We're getting the adductors, making sure they can move in all planes, and just making sure, again, coming back to the volume, not tipping them over into anything. So you just want to expose it, keep it open, feel a little bit of intensity. So like for pitchers and broad jump, we know that correlates to pitch speed. I just want to provide the small dose of that to, again, that's kind of like a med ball drill. It's bridging the gap between strength and their sport. So you need to move along the force velocity curve and expose them to everything between heavy and slow and body weight movement.
A lot of our college coaches will ask, on a typical week. So let's talk about, Monday through Sunday. Monday, typically an off day, right? Assuming maybe some travel or a series the previous weekend. Maybe Tuesday or Wednesday is a midweek game because those are super popular. Thursday might be a practice day, right? And maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on their schedule. And if they're home, there's a series. If they're not, they're traveling. How does a college coach talk to their strength coach about where do they get strength and conditioning in? What, again, you've mentioned it doesn't take a lot of time. What would that structure, in your opinion, look like over the course of a week, considering that they maybe have a midweek game? How would you describe, what they would do each day generally?
Yeah, I mean, that can come into, it could be worked around the practice schedule, like the strength. If you do this after practice, it's 30 minutes. The team is warm already and it's going to the gym. It's hitting some big patterns, and it's sending them home. Like I said, it's just exposing them to it, to like keep their nervous system awake to these big things, so they're not just getting pigeonholed by softball and the 7-ounce ball and their less than 2-pound bat. Like that's all they're getting exposed to. So if you can just give them a little bit on the higher end of intensity, more weight, and in those small doses, it will keep them much fresher. It will keep them moving better. It will keep their tissue resilient for everything that they're going to go through.
That comment of, the less than a 2-pound bat, the 7-ounce ball, I think what you're describing, where my brain went to was like, you're using strength and conditioning to help them continue to adapt to other types of training loads besides the things that they use in their sport. Right. That's why we talk about plyo so much with pitchers, how we promote variability with pitchers through plyos, with hitters, long bats, short bats, heavy bats, right? In terms of promoting adaptation. Strength and conditioning, the way you're describing it, is really no different from that. And that goal in season, correct me if I'm wrong in paraphrasing, that goal in season is just to really make sure that they're exposed to external loads that are basically more than what they get in practice in a game. Because if that's all they get in practice in a game, that's what they adapt to. Did I paraphrase that appropriately?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about our youth athletes. So over the last, couple of months, particularly June, I will say, we've had a lot of assessments come through the door, both in our college program, our summer program, but also with our, some high school and middle school athletes that are, trying to understand themselves and their stories. When you have an opportunity to communicate with parents, with families, or you talk to a new athlete who's come on with us about their background in strength and conditioning, how would you guide parents and or athletes in what are you looking for in a personal trainer or a strength coach? Because we've got remote athletes, right? They don't come to our facility as frequently as our in-house athletes. So parents a lot of questions are, who do we trust, right? And sometimes we have athletes who, they do better when someone else's eyes are on them. They need that guidance and support. What do you say to parents who are looking for a personal trainer? What questions should they ask when they are vetting someone for not just their child, but their child who plays softball?
So first thing walking in the door, if you see a puke bucket, turn around and walk out. Because there's just so much of a culture of working out, and it's are you leaving the gym with a red face and your shirt is soaked, and that's not what sports performance is. It's quality movement, it's loading it, it's expressing the finesse of your sport, and you just can't be the hardest worker in the room can help in certain aspects, but you need to move the right way. There needs to be structure to the training. There can't just be a different workout of the day thrown on the whiteboard.
Got it.
Because that doesn't show the roadmap of where an athlete is now and where you're trying to get them to be. If they're not recording how much weight they're doing each week, what's the point? If they're not you need some way to measure the progress that you're making to, take that before and after photo and actually see if they're moving the needle in that direction.
Right. To me, recording your weights in the weight room is no different than Rapsodo data, HitTrax data.
Yeah.
It doesn't just stop at the field, right? It has to. And I think we talk about our systems, we've developed those, both I think subjective and objective measures as we, see the athlete outside the circle, outside the batter's box, work her all the way through her, her hitting or swing and pitching patterns. But the keeping track of weights, I think, has probably been one of the most influential things that our athletes have started to do to actually see the progress that they've made. Right. And to see well, wait a minute, if I was 15 pounds on an exercise last week and I don't go up this week, am I going to create an adaptation? Maybe not. And I should at least know that that's my starting point for this week. It's no different than collecting your ball flight, like I said, your exit velocities. It's still important and relevant information, as you said, for the long term, right? So playing the long term. So I heard two things. I heard no puke bucket. That's a good one. No puke bucket. and the concept of having a structured plan, that it's not just simply like, here's your workout for today. Maybe it's, and maybe there is a plan and the way they're communicating it is on the whiteboard, but having that structured plan, a parent asking for, what does a 3, 6, 9, 12, what are we looking for across that year? No different than what we talk about with going up in pitch velocity, going up in exit velocity, getting out of pain and soreness. Those things are just as important to measure. How about, I know you and I have talked internally. I have some thoughts, obviously, but when you hear an athlete talk about past training and they mention X, Y, Z, exercise, configuration, what are some of those things that parents, when they hear that, should maybe tread cautiously if that's what that personal trainer or strength coach is using to promote adaptation?
You're saying like choosing like this movement is the best way to do this, or
simply more approach like, my brain goes to like Olympic lifting. That's a common question that we get a lot. What role does Olympic lifting have? What, you mentioned like a workout of the day concept. Like, what are some things that when parents hear from that personal trainer, from that strength coach, that they might want to just like pause for a second?
Yeah. So we could just talk about like Olympic lifting, and it could be fun. It could be a tool if used appropriately to develop the qualities that you want for an athlete. But yeah, okay, was you want to just talk about the clean? You're explosively triple extending and then rapidly getting under to accept the weight at your shoulders. You can train that so similarly without the skill needed for cleans, with trap bar jumps, with dumbbell jumps, with anything loaded that doesn't, I don't want to, I like a compromised position, because I'm not going to expect a 12-year-old to be able to perfectly rip a bar up and get their wrists underneath to accept the weight on their shoulders and not in their hands, how so many of them want to do it. And training should not get in the way of their sport. If they tweak their wrist, like I have USA weightlifting certifications, and I have tweaked my wrist doing cleans, where I don't really do them now because there are just as effective other ways to get the similar adaptation that they're looking for doing that anyways. So if somebody's swearing by back squats or swearing by cleans or agility ladders or whatever, like that's just a tool. And you as a strength coach should be able to get into a deeper your tool bag, and just be like, okay, analyze, assess where this athlete is right now and pick something that's appropriate for where they're at. Not just being like, you're going to clean because that's what we do here. Like that's not necessary or the most like efficient way to get your athlete from point A to point B.
When you were talking about the technical skill, I think that's where I often find my conversations with parents going is kind of just like what's your bang for your buck, right? If you're in I'll pick on the high school lifting programs, because sometimes we get a really mixed bag. Some are really great and thoughtful and well controlled, and, do not ask things of the athlete that are inappropriate, isolated from their sport. And then there are some that run the opposite side of the spectrum, which is true of a lot of things. And the ones that typically, sit on this is really not appropriate for them are like the bench squat clean concept, right? That the big three, as I call them. So when I hear that from an athlete and they say, oh, my high school program or whatever, my personal trainer, whoever that is, all we do is bench squat and clean. All I hear is, and that's the only adaptations you're going to create. Right. And so the clean particularly, and I'll say Olympic lifting, I'm not anti-Olympic lifting either. It has its place. It has absolutely the ability to create power output. But as you said, which is an excellent point, the technical skill that's required is, it takes a long time to truly understand how to execute, not just a clean, but even a clean and jerk, whatever, with an overhead press. Those things take technical skill and they take trunk stability. So when you talk about the young athlete, the 12, 13-year-old, who's maybe very, very close, has just started puberty, she doesn't have any trunk stability. So we've got to be really careful about applying these adaptations or these exercises that are really rooted in needing that trunk stability. We have to grow that first. Now, as she gets older, maybe late in high school or even in college, could she handle cleans? Yes. But, and again, I'm picking on cleans, but the amount of hyperextension, the amount of trunk stability required, right? So I personally, this is a very strong opinion. I am anti-cleans for pitchers, particularly because of the hyperextension that can happen when they don't have trunk control. It does not mean the cleans are a bad exercise. I think that's what I say collectively in the strength and conditioning community sometimes feel like that's what's being said, is that the clean is bad. It's not. It's more being thoughtful of what you said in the beginning of, I can't get in the way of their sport, right? I can't get in the way of their ability to play softball. And so oftentimes I see the use of cleans and when, pitchers particularly are really, really adapted to the clean pattern and they didn't have that baseline trunk stability, their hyperextension's through the roof. It shows up everywhere in a hinge, in a squat, and that affects the pitching motion. And I think that's the thing to keep in mind is, as the strength coach, as you've said, you can't be in a silo. You can't have a negative impact on what that athlete's doing on the field. And, in those conversations with parents, I hear those and I kind of already know where the conversation is going because I've had it so many times, but the answer is not clean's bad. It's not that. Not Olympic lifting is bad. It's that it takes time to develop that skill. And to be honest, with the nature of recruiting, with the nature of just youth sports and demands, those kids don't have time to learn that skill.
No.
They don't have time for the technical. They're always too tired.
I'm not going to spend the 2 months that I get with them over the winter learning how to clean so that they may finally be understanding it. And then I send them off to high school and I'm lucky if I see them one day a week. Right.
And that's not their fault. That is not.
What? No.
It's not their fault. Right. But again, if you were talking about getting to adaptations efficiently, particularly for young athletes, I think I wouldn't put Olympic lifting on that list, right? As a tool and a mechanism for adaptation. It takes a long time to learn the technicality of that and to have the trunk rotation and trunk stability available. And pitchers especially, because we know pitch volume is out of control, that fatigue is a bear. You mentioned the anterior core test. Like, those are the regressions that we see. And if we're trying to support her pitching motion and prevent regressions, we certainly don't want to put her in positions where she's lifting and doing a particular lift already under fatigue from pitching that requires this high degree. We're trying to preserve trunk stability, right? Not just blow it up through power for the sake of power. I think that is a common misconception that we hear sometimes about how does strength and conditioning support the softball athlete, is that it has to be one way or the other. And there's a lot of conversation in between. And I always say, it's not our programming is right or wrong compared to somebody else's. It's that we continue to measure movement quality and power to make sure that we are creating the appropriate adaptations. And I think that's an important question that parents ask, is what's the roadmap look like? You said it so well. What's the roadmap look like? Right? What's the plan? It's tricky when, the strength side and their skill side sit separately in silos. And obviously the advantage of our systems is that they're together, but the reality of being in season, the reality of being a remote athlete, there will be other people involved. And I think the questions the parents ask of those people are really important, just to vet that it's going to be supportive to them.
The weight room is that is movement skill within there. So
well said.
When you put it back on that potential strength coach or personal trainer, whoever you go to see that, it's what is my athlete going to learn from training with you? Are they going to learn the difference between a squat and a hinge? Are they going to understand maybe different planes of movement? It's not just, we're going to squat, they're going to be stronger, their max is going to be 50 pounds heavier in 3 months. It's at what cost, and what are they taking with them? Because they're not going to train with personal trainer forever. They're going to, if they are fortunate enough to become a college athlete, they're going to be stepping into the weight room. And I get a lot of pride personally from my athletes going on to college and being able to step right in and be that example. Oh, you want to see somebody do a good squat that's loaded appropriately and sequenced the right way? You use my athlete. because they're going to understand what hinging is. They're going to understand what squatting is. They're going to understand how to move in different planes.
Good one. When we talk about, this is not on our prepared questions, but what you just said really, I think really leads into it. I think another thing that we see that I always caution parents against is the grind, right? The 6 days a week, I got to do something every day. Sometimes parents will say, parents or athletes, I think it happens in both scenarios where sometimes it may be a college athlete, but oftentimes it's parents describing their kid. She just works so hard. She's in the gym 6 days a week. And then we see them in an assessment and their movement quality is really lacking in usually particular areas, usually rotation, but their movement quality is lacking. They might have great power, but their fatigue might get in the way of their ability to produce that power. We always say in our program, 3 days a week, max. Talk a little bit more about that. Why is that intentional? Yeah. Why is that so important?
You mentioned the grind too. I just listened to a snippet from my track coach from high school, Tony Holler, and he's a feed the cats guy. He's a small, intense doses, keep your athletes fresh, able to always ready to perform, especially in track and field. That's important, but just as much as softball, they shouldn't be limping into the weekend for their, 3-4 games in a single day tournament. They should be showing up feeling good and being fresh. So grinding, like he said, the verb is reducing something to a powder, and the grind, the noun, is dull work. So that we're not just working to work. We're not working to leave the room with a red face to say you work harder than everybody else. There's the phrase work harder or work smarter, not harder.
Right.
So I would rather, like we said, introduce these skills, get better at it, build some strength in these certain positions, and be healthy and feel good heading into your weekend so that you can go and play your sport. That's why we're doing this. It's not like that just gets into the stress and what somebody can actually recover from and be able to show their best, because we all know they ain't sleeping how they should be sleeping. They're not eating how they should be eating. So you want to get into overworking, under recovering, and then expecting them to go be the best player on their team come weekend. It's not realistic, especially with the average athlete that you will get.
Sure.
They will show up with maybe it's 4 p.m. and you'll be surprised how many times I've heard somebody's had one or less meal. We've had athletes come from out of town and it's 5 p.m. They just flew all day to come and train with us, and they had a handful of strawberries.
Right.
And it's why would you expect to be able to perform on that? That's not even base level sustenance, and you're trying to be at the top of the pyramid at performance. You don't have the other things in your life sorted to support performance. So why would you expect it?
I really, really liked your analogy about the grind. I really liked that, both the noun and verb of. I think that's a phrase I'm gonna take with me, of just grind means you just grind it to a pulp, right? It just gets obliterated. And when I work with an athlete on an initial assessment, and I usually casually ask about, I'm giving away all my secrets here in my assessment, but I usually ask what their strength and conditioning background is, if they have one. Helps me to understand training age, helps me to understand what I might expect from them, movement quality wise. Sometimes it even helps me to tailor the instructions for the exercises. I've worked with plenty of athletes that they don't understand a lateral squat. They don't get even the combination of two planes of motion, let alone, really even the setup for it. So it helps me to tailor just where they're at, right? Their level of competency in these movements. And the athletes that often come to us and say, yeah, I already train 6 days a week, sometimes are worst movers. They have been obliterated by just this over adaptation. And then sometimes on top of that, we see mental health challenges because of overtraining syndrome. And sometimes those mental health challenges they're not appropriately attached to the overtraining concept. right? And it becomes sort of this like cycle of, well, I have to go 6 days a week, or I got to do something every day, or I feel like I'm going to mentally fall apart. And what that tells me is that we've got to work a little bit more on rest and recovery, which is a topic we'll get to in a second. But rest and recovery, and basically not letting your nervous system realize that physical activity is not a threat, right? And that's what their bodies have experienced by that grind concept, is that their body's like, wait a minute, this is way too much, too frequent, too whatever. I'm exhausted. And so I have to keep you doing this because I think I have to do this to survive. Right. And then it just becomes this cycle. And you give an athlete like that a 3-day-a-week program, and they're like, well, what do I do the other 4 days of the week? Right. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of rest and recovery. There are obviously so many, I'll say, gadgets and gimmicks and, things that people will do. So things like, Theraguns and BioFreeze. And I have my own opinions on that. But what does rest and recovery, how do you communicate that to an athlete? What does that mean to you as a strength coach?
I would like them to be doing nothing and to eat a lot of food, or just like go have relationships, go have friends, go do your homework, like be a good student, be a good family member, like go and feel those things out, because you will see the athlete who trains for 6 days a week and then they're running to the ground and they quit the sport. Right. And what do you have? Like you feel like crap. Your mental is all over the place. Right. And you don't have those other like supporting pieces of your human nature.
Your identity.
It was all just softball. So like what experiences, what anything like that, like what do you take after that? Like that was your whole life. You need other pieces. But like the 3 days a week with stress and rest and recovery, you need time doing nothing. Like anything you go and do is stress on the system, no matter how light it may feel. You want to go for a 15-mile bike ride to like let your mind go, whatever. That is something you need time to recover from. So I wouldn't expect you to come in and with our heavy lower main strength movement to feel good. Like, you made some endorphins running and, you got a sweat in and you feel good when you get home and you can sit on the couch and you're in that blissful state. And then you show up next day, you got noodle legs trying to do anything in the weight room. Right. It's like, and everything you do fills into the bucket of stress. So there are things about massages and stuff like that, whether that actually aids in recovery or the placebo effect. If you feel like something like that, a passive recovery modality, there is some stuff like mentally where you'll feel more recovered, whether there's any structural change happening in your body or not. So you like getting a massage every now and then, go ahead. It's not going to hurt you. You like sitting there at the end of the day, Theragunning your legs or whatever, go ahead. But don't expect that to be the reason you feel good the next day. Like
I think that's where a lot of parents and athletes they get that misconception that, okay, I'm going to go 6 days a week and then I'm going to add these things. I'm going to add, and again, my background's athletic training, so I know these like modalities of the Theraguns, and I mentioned the biofreezes and electrical stimulation. They certainly have their place by all means in the treatment of musculoskeletal issues. But I think what parents and athletes often fall into the trap of is, okay, I'm already doing so much in my training, right? Whether that's weight room specific or not. And then I have to add more things to recover, right? I have to do more things to recover. Even if those things are low stress, it is still additional time. It is still, it can be expense. I've had parents ask about, should we purchase a game ready for our pitcher, for her arm? And I have opinions on that. And I fall in the same camp. We've actually never talked about this, but I fall in the same camp as you. If the harm is minimal, let's use a bag of ice, for example. If the harm is minimal, there's very little harm that can happen from a bag of ice. Do I think that's the be all end all of keeping pitchers healthy? Absolutely not. And we have a lot of evidence now that even icing post initial injury probably isn't the way to go. But if it makes her feel better, if that makes her feel better up here, if that gives her as you said, placebo, I don't care. It's effective. There's no harm in it, right? It's when we start to get into the crossing that threshold of harm. So things that, in my opinion, add more stress, right? So like long runs to flush lactic acid, right?
Yeah.
So some of these misconceptions of what do I have to do in addition to let my body recover? And what we're saying is, well, if your structured athletic training, your structured strength and conditioning program is a thumbs up, you shouldn't need that. You shouldn't need to do more. It's sort of the opposite. You're just adding more things when you really need just to do less better. That's probably the biggest piece of advice I give to our athletes is do less better. And I always say we never ask, particularly pitchers, although this does stand for other positions, I never ask pitchers to do more. We never ask pitchers to do more. We are always talking to pitchers about reining in what they do, right? The amount of full intensity throwing, the kinds of training that they're doing outside the circle. Do less better. It's going to serve you far more efficiently for rest and recovery than any of those, I'll call them gadgets and whatever. But if they make you feel better in the moment, I don't say no to those things. And I think that's an important point when you've got social media, selling you things, influencing you on what does it mean to rest and recover? It means letting your body rest and recover, literally by those words, right? That's a good one. Our last prepared question, I'm kind of laughing at this because we've been talking about this for the last week of the speed and agility classes. So this is not a knock towards the practitioners that offer the speed and agility classes, not a knock to them at all. There is a place for those types of things, as we've talked about with Olympic lifting. It's I have a presumption when I hear an athlete say, especially if they're a new athlete, so I go to speed and agility classes. I make an assumption already about what I think is happening in those classes. You have obviously experience on this, that, kind of speed and agility side, as well as the more, I'll say, traditional strength and conditioning. I don't even think those are the right words, but when you hear an athlete say speed and agility, one, is that enough for a softball player based on what we're sort of presuming those classes look like? And why isn't it enough if it's not enough?
Well, yeah, you answered it a little there. It is not enough. Yeah. But it's just a piece of the full athletic developmental puzzle. It's just one piece. Again, that's just getting back to that's body weight only movement at a high rate of speed, which is very close to what their sport is already. And you want to talk about sport specific, blah, blah, blah. That's all garbage anyways. But the other things like strength will enhance your ability to do any of that stuff anyways. So being a stronger athlete will allow you to put more force in the ground when you're sprinting and when you're trying to change direction. It's how well can you manage your body weight and accelerate through space. You need strength to support that. You need quality movement, organized movement, rhythmic movement to be able to make that stuff happen. And that's all neurological. That's all the type of tissue you're showing up to the line with. So it's just one piece. It's one piece. It helps just the med ball stuff. It's just along the spectrum of stuff that you should be exposed to as an athlete. You need the heavy, slow stuff with high intent. You need the medium weight for power that you're trying to move. Everything's always at high intent unless you're doing a yielding ISO or something like that. But for a heavy squat, just because it ain't moving fast, it doesn't mean you're not trying to move it fast. With cleans, for example, that is a bar you are trying to rip up and move fast. And that, moving along that and exposing your tissue to everything in that spectrum will make you the more well-rounded, resilient athlete, and not just the one, you want to talk about an agility ladder or whatever. What do I like that for? I think it gives you quality contacts at the ankle, and I think that it can get your heart rate up and get you, be incorporated as part of a warm-up. Do I think that's going to make you faster? No. You're not putting force into the ground, changing direction. You going from a full sprint, putting your foot in the floor and changing direction, that ain't going to be influenced by dancing on a ladder. You want to measure the force you're putting in the ground, it ain't even close to what you're exposed to in your sport. So you can't pretend that that's helping you get closer to.
Your point about its body weight is what really stuck with me in that response. I think we as a team have gotten so much better about communicating the role of strength and conditioning, right? And supporting the pitcher and the hitter and the player overall. And going all the way back to the very beginning of our conversation of, what does an in-season athlete need? What are our misconceptions about, training rotational athletes for power? It comes to, you can't just use one stimulus, right? Mm-hmm. You can't just use one stimulus. So, whether these misconceptions are rooted in a lack of understanding or assumptions made about the athlete, it all in my mind boils down to, you just can't pick one modality, one thing, right? And just hang your hat on that. As an athlete, as the complexity of the body is so evident to us, one thing won't do it, right? That 7-ounce softball in that, shortstop's hand is only going to be one adaptation if that's all she throws. Mm-hmm. And so just like strength and conditioning, just like in pitching and hitting, you've got to vary the stimulus. You got to vary what you are attacking in that stimulus.
Yeah, especially because
getting to the root of it?
Yeah, because not everybody's a freak of nature. Like, most of us aren't. 99% of us are not
average
people that could see. Exactly. Like, that's just the bell curve of life. Like, so the people that are, like, you want to talk about, like, NFL combine stuff. Those are guys that have been in strength and conditioning, that have done all that stuff. They are able to squat 500 pounds or whatever. So they got the force thing down. Mm-hmm. So they can go get away with doing, like, a speed and agility thing to, like, refine some skills that they already have the physical qualities to execute. But you want to talk about the average person who this is their first time doing anything to try to enhance their ability to play their sport. You need the big picture. You can't do the one thing.
I want to just like mic drop that one. That's a good one. I have 2 final questions, not prepared. These are on the spot.
What do we got?
What is your favorite exercise that you program for pitchers?
For pitchers. Oh gosh. All right. There are 2 that kind of like pull into my brain. So I like split squats a lot. Mm-hmm. So just unilateral. It gets them over that, like the leg that they're going to push off the rubber with, develop the strength there. Cause like I said, like for sequencing, we talked about it with hitting earlier, but pitching is also a sequence that starts from the ground up. It is how they're interacting with the ground and transferring force up the chain. So you got to start down there. And then, like I've heard from some athletes that they don't do any upper body once the season starts, and you can't expect to stay healthy doing that. So a push-up variation I've been using a lot is a 3-second eccentric. So it's just really owning that, making sure the elbows are tracking appropriately. And then I put an overhead reach at the bottom. So they lower themselves all the way to the floor. They get a big overhead reach, own it for 2 seconds. And then if they need to drop to their knees to push back up, they could do that. Whatever it takes to remain like postured and structured in that push-up. So you expose them to all the good little stuff that everybody likes to do, like for the arm care things, and it's tempoed, it's closed chain, they're getting core work there. They have to think about what they're doing because they're not just flopping down to the ground for push-ups or doing partial range motion because I'm making them lay down on the ground at the bottom of that push-up. So not even that it's just a total movement, but I really like implementing tempo. Not even like strict eccentric tempos where it's like, we're going for 5 seconds, you're going as slow as possible, whatever. It's just, I want you to own the movement. Mm-hmm. So that's more of like, not even necessarily a movement I love the most for pitchers, but some rules behind the movements that I'm prescribing.
How about for hitters? I know I put you on the spot here.
Yeah. I like, it's more just like one of those connect the dot type movements, like the med ball stuff we were talking about, but like rotational med ball slam variations. And I do like making this one heavier, because there's less skill as opposed to like a scoop toss. And we know that the supine trunk throws we do correlate the most with exit velocity. So if I can get an athlete to incorporate some rotation and have to think about it a little bit, and sequence and move while being super aggressive and trying to, like, you'll hear me yelling across the gym all the time, like, try to break the ball. Like, if somebody breaks a ball, I'll buy you Chipotle. Like, somebody do it. Somebody make us buy a new ball, because like that's what's gonna raise you. You need that. Like, we're trying to hit home runs. We want home runs. So if you wanna go from warning track power to putting those things over the fence, like, you need to give it all you got. And it's not just maxing either. That's give it all you got goes into like the intent you have behind it too. So it's like the tempos I've talked about is like, own it. When I tell you don't let your knee cross over your midline when we're doing split squats, it's like, focus, like, give me that good 3 count on the way down. Let your knee track over your shoelaces. Like, don't just be flopping all over the place, and just, be intuitive on the weight you're going to grab next set. It's like, okay, like we talked about, you did 15-pound dumbbells last week. That was pretty easy. I feel like I got more in the tank. I'm probably a little bit stronger now that my body's figuring out what I'm doing in the weight room. Let's try to throw these 20s around and see what we got.
Yep.
And it's just be intentional. Be intentional. Try.
Structured, intentional attention to detail. I think those are 3 things that I would very much describe our programming right now. I think in strength and conditioning, but in pitching and hitting too. But structured, intentional, getting the right stimulus in there. And I do hope that, coaches that are listening to our conversation start to see the connection with, not just strength and conditioning. I've always said it has a branding problem, right? It's when you say strength and conditioning, it's like, I go back to the speed and agility. We get asked, you guys do speed and agility? And we're like, yeah, it's called strength and conditioning, right? But it kind of has a branding problem, because, as you said, in season, you don't need a ton of time. But when people hear strength and conditioning, they think, I got to be in a rack with a bar. I need equipment. And I think that we've done a great job of continuing to educate our athletes of just like, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? The simplicity of getting in a good 30 minutes of something while you're in season is better than nothing.
Yeah, especially in season. Yeah, right. There's a time and a place for soreness and intensity and like all that, but we're going to save that for the off season when we're trying to when I'm trying to take you from the athlete you are right now and send you into the season as a different person. That's when we're going to start to see like what you got. But like when we're playing games and this stuff matters and you got college coaches there, I'm not going to throw a leg day at you where you're having a hard time standing up off the toilet when you're done. Like that's not we're doing strength and conditioning to support your sport.
Yep. Oh, well, that's a great point to end on right there. James, thank you. This is in our usual OGX podcast, I'm usually following Ashley when I answer a question, so I really appreciate the opportunity to give my views, although I, of course, love the times that I get to have conversations with Krista and Ashley, but to be nerdy and to be really talking some of the details of strength and conditioning and our systems is it's a treat. It really is. So thank you so much. I hope any of our listeners, if you have questions, reach out to us. We are more than happy to, talk you through our perspective on how we can help either your athlete, your kid, your team, and helping you to kind of understand this integration with strength and conditioning. So James, thank you very much.
Thank you.